Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Darko Ages. We're back after a bit of a longer absence, but we're excited to jump back into another college football episode. The long-awaited. I know we teased it on the last pod, so I'm sure all the listeners have been waiting with bated breath here for us to get to the equivalent on the MSU side of 2007 football, the Michigan State Spartans from 2007. We're going to dive into that here in a minute. We'll start just how's everybody feeling this evening? Pat, you just got back from Scotland. Any course reports you want to give us? How's the golf game?
The golf game's up and down. The courses were incredible. It was an awesome trip. I just had a great time. Super cool.
Did you break 90 at all? What happened?
Yeah. The only times I shot in the 90s was I actually shot, I think, 101 the first round we got there. That was after the red eye, and that was rough. I couldn't make contact. Then
we're blaming the flight for that. That's what we're going with.
Yes, I'm blaming the zero sleep for that. And then we played Carnoustie in the wind. It was like 30-mile-per-hour winds. And you have any spin on any of your shots, the wind is it punishes you. So I think I shot 95 at Carnoustie. But at the home of the Open, the first course it was ever played at, Prestwick. They don't play it there anymore, but I shot 79 there, so I was pretty proud of that.
Dang, look at you go. You and Jean Vandevelde can commiserate over the challenges of Carnoustie.
Yeah, playing it, you realize the course is so challenging because the bunkers are super punishing and the burns make it so you have to lay up on so many shots. And if you have all these long irons into a green, into the wind, you may think it's an easy carry, but then all of a sudden there's a burn there where if you miss hit at all or if you just misjudge and come up short in the wind gusts and so there's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Mentally, it's a challenge.
Nice. Sounds like fun. Love to do a golf trip to Scotland at some point. It'd be good times. Zach, anything on your end to report? I just saw you a couple weeks ago. I don't think you've traveled overseas in the interim. How's the youth softball circuit going? Crushing it?
Yeah, it's softball's a much different sport. Never really played baseball growing up myself, but practices are sort of brutal just because when the wind kicks up, it's just like a dust storm, and that is just so. It's just I had to shower yesterday after coming back from practice. Pat, you shot a 101 your first night. The good thing is that's the metric system. I think that's about a 60 in America. So congratulations, by the way.
It's the UK though, so it's
yeah.
They're still imperialists over there, right?
Yeah,
gotcha. That's where we got it from.
Oh, okay. Well, I tried.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's enough chit chat. But we haven't talked in person in a while. So, or I guess virtually, we haven't talked in person in much longer than that. So it's always good to catch up a little bit. Let's get into Michigan State football. 2007, a big year for MSU because it is the first year of the Mark Dantonio era. The team itself wouldn't be all that memorable except for maybe a couple of key games, and again because it was the start of the Dantonio tenure, but they went 7-6. So pretty much the epitome of mediocrity, though coming out of the John L. Smith era for Michigan State, 7-6 felt pretty good, not gonna lie. We were like, dang, okay, there's a little bit of potential here. Zach, what do you remember about 2007 Michigan State football in a big picture sense?
Yeah, in a big picture sense, it just felt like we were an actual football team. And I've mentioned this, I think, on the previous pod where I've talked to you, Kenny, especially just if we win 8 games every year, then I'm just the happiest camper alive. And yeah, Michigan State that year went 7-5 in the regular season. Of course, lost the bowl game to future NFL MVP Matt Ryan. I'm pretty sure he won an NFL MVP. Yeah, the big picture, it was just getting away from John L. Smith. This was our first winning season since 2003, which is just a ridiculous sort of thing to deal with for 4 years. We went 4-8 the year prior. So just seeing competency, plays happen, passes down the field, touchdowns being scored, big plays happening, it excites you.
Yeah, for sure. Just not feeling hopeless was a good stretch for us. Some key players, Brian Hoyer, the starting quarterback, ended up having a lengthy NFL career, was just a really good, solid a solid NFL backup, a solid college quarterback, though maybe a little underappreciated at the time, in part because of maybe the way some of the MSU seasons played out ahead of him. He sat behind Drew Stanton, who was also a really good college quarterback, but didn't have a lot of team success. So Brian Hoyer hadn't really played a lot. And then he kind of arrives on the scene and you're like, hey, this guy is pretty good. They also featured Javon Ringer and J.U. Kulkrick, a memorable and entertaining running back duo. Javon Ringer, I remember him being really good the next year, which I think was sort of his big workhorse year after Kulkrick was gone. But looking at the stats, he averaged 5.9 yards a carry, 1,547 yards. So I think one of the things I had underrated about this particular MSU team was how explosive the offense was, which was sort of interesting to look back on, because as the Dantonio era went on, we started to become much more known for our defense, right? This suffocating defense that he and Pat Narduzzi built. And then again, on the offensive side, Devin Thomas, who, maybe nobody better signifies the John L. Smith era than Devin Thomas. And that's specifically because, so Mark Dantonio gets there and Devin Thomas, I distinctly remember Zach and I being like, who is this guy? Like, where did he come from? Early in the season, he's kept making big plays. He finishes with 1,260 yards, 79 catches. I looked up his prior year stats, and I think he had less than 100 receiving yards. So it's just like, what is happening? Not a strong endorsement of the John L. Smith era. When you're seeing guys who have been in the program for a long time and never saw the field, and all of a sudden they're just exploding. You're just like, what? Why didn't we get to see this for the last several years? Pat, I'm sure you weren't closely following the MSU roster, but as a Michigan fan, we talked on the last pod about what Michigan was going through. But what were your impressions of Michigan State, coming off of your 4 years in college where you never lost? Was it always just like, hey, we're not that interested, we'll come out on top as usual? Were you following it?
Yeah, I think that Michigan fans like to paint it in that lens, like, oh, we're not even that concerned about Michigan State. That's not totally fair. John L. Smith, like you guys are talking about what a disaster it was, but he had a good first season at Michigan State. And then Michigan had a really good team at my freshman year in 2003. And then the next year, Michigan State blew it against Michigan at night on Halloween. The famous Braylon Edwards game was, if that game goes differently, you wonder about the John L. Smith era. They come in the next year. I mean, I look at all this from a Michigan fan's perspective, so I remember the games with Michigan more than the rest of the MSU. But they come in the next year, or actually I sat with you, Kenny, in the Michigan State student section my junior year of college in 2005. Michigan State was 4-0. Michigan was unranked, and I think Michigan State was like 10th in the country. They were like, had a lot of hype around Stanton and the offense and this kind of John L. Smith era. People were excited about it, and Michigan won the game in overtime. It was a hard-fought game, could have gone either way. And looking in hindsight, that was basically the turning point for John L. Smith, and as close as he ever got. The season kind of cratered after that. They only won one game. So started 4-0 and then only won one game in the last 8. And then the next season go 4-8 again and aren't even close, not even competitive against Michigan. So it felt like going into 2007, the programs were as far apart as they had felt ever in my, hyper Michigan fandom. I didn't feel there was a huge gap, even though we kept winning, which was fun. And then all of a sudden it did feel like there was a huge gap, and these weren't even on the same, so in this 2007 season, even though Michigan was having its own struggles that we documented on the last pod, I didn't go into the MSU game thinking it would be all that close.
Yeah, so that's a good transition, because I do, I'm going to go through, well, actually, let's just start right there with that game, because I think it's the most memorable game for a lot of reasons, and I think that it's a good, it's sort of a good microcosm of where the MSU program was for a lot of the reasons you just talked about, and ended up being sort of a turning point in the way the rivalry went. So I was talking earlier, I kind of went back and watched the highlights, and Michigan actually jumped out to an early lead in that game. And I can say, as an MSU fan, given where the last season had been, the expectations, we were not hopeful, right? I mean, Zach can probably reiterate this. We didn't have a lot of experience coming from behind against Michigan. So Michigan jumps out to this early lead, and surprisingly, MSU comes back and scores 21 straight points, and then the game is a little back and forth and competitive. Michigan State goes into the fourth quarter with a lead, and then Chad Henne and Mario Manningham sort of just take over the game in a way that was extremely frustrating for MSU fans, because it's like we had just seen the script before. So we talked before, you guys, I don't really remember being there, maybe I was, but you guys said that you were watching the game together. I know it's been a long time, but what do you think the emotions were like in that room? Do you think at the end of that game you guys were on speaking terms, or Pat was just celebrating, like probably bonging beers in celebration while Zach just stewed in the corner? What do you guys think was happening?
Yeah, I remember specifically, and maybe my memory has been clouded by the slow passing of time, but Pat was really sort of just normal. That's kind of the easiest way to describe it. There was no sort of gloating. He was just like, I can tell that hurt you. I'm sorry that happened. And I think I was like, yeah, go F yourself, basically. But there wasn't a ton of, from what I recall, Pat wasn't gloating a ton at the end of the game, just because it was like, Michigan snatched victory out of the claws of defeat or whatever. And it was just classic Michigan State. I was so excited for so long in that game, and then just had my heart broken. And I don't think he could gloat just looking at my sad face.
Yeah, I'm glad I was kind to you. I think that also probably had to do with the circumstances of Michigan's season, where it was like, woo, great, we won this game, but we still are not, we still came up way below expectations on the season unless we can somehow manage to win out and beat Ohio State, So it was like, this is just, it was a great win. In hindsight, it's a better win than it felt like at the time, because we were still just like had a dark cloud over us from the Appalachian State loss.
And unlike the 2005 year where Michigan State came into the Michigan game with some momentum and highly ranked, in this case, Michigan State coming into that game was 5-4, had just gotten beat by Iowa, had lost a competitive game to Ohio State a couple weeks before that, but it was pretty, there wasn't, even though Michigan was having a down year, the hype surrounding the game, honestly, looking back on it, was probably just way lower than it had been in other times in the rivalry, because MSU was not overly optimistic at that point yet about the Dantonio era, was kind of in the middle of a first-year rebuild, having okay results, but nothing to be that excited about. And, of course, Michigan had lost those early two games and honestly was on a bit of a run here, but was still, relative to expectations coming into the season, it still felt like a disappointment, and probably a win over a 5-4 Michigan State team was not something that Michigan fans were going to be jumping up and down about.
Yeah, but I think we need to talk about that a little bit, or at least I'm going to talk about that a little bit, in that Michigan fans, and Pat might disagree with me here, never really cared about this game, right? Michigan State has always cared about this game. Michigan always cares about the Ohio State game. Yes, you want to beat all the teams you play every year, but I mean, truly, Michigan State has never been Michigan's rival until this year, once the final whistle blew and there was the post-game interviews, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So that's honestly, I was going to ask you guys this question later, but let's just jump into it. Do you feel like Ohio State is the bigger rival, or do you feel like Michigan State is the bigger rival? And do you think that you would have answered the question the same way in 2007 as you would now, or where you would have in say like 2015, 2016? Do you think that's changed for you?
Yeah, that's you kind of phrased it perfectly. I think I would have, in 2007, would have scoffed at the idea of the rivalry with Michigan State being on the same level as Ohio State. In 2016, I certainly would not have scoffed at that. I think it is somewhat cyclical. Michigan has to be the best team in its own state to be on a competitive level with Ohio State. I think the measuring stick is Ohio State and always will be for Michigan, but if they can't beat Michigan State, then they're not going to be on that level anyway. So I think it's like a stepping stone. So there's kind of like that first rivalry, and some of that might be the way that the schedule sets up. Michigan always plays Michigan State earlier in the season, halfway through, first third, second third, something like that. And then there's always a gap, and they always end with Ohio State. So it has this feeling of this is the season's leading up to the Ohio State game. So I think that adds to where the rivalry is ranked.
Yeah, I just want to say that we're no one's stepping stone.
Yeah, I thought Zach might have a comment there. I agree. I mean, I'll speak for him since he's not on here. I feel like our mutual friend Tyler at various points has been like, I cared more about the MSU game, in part because the Ohio State game, a lot of times because it was at the end of the year, had bigger stakes for the actual football outcomes. But on a personal level, like, how many Ohio State fans do you actually have in your life? Maybe one or two, right? But the Michigan State rivalry is ingrained in, I mean, our friendship for sure, and all of the friendships around the state of people who are fans of one school, families. You know, you're going to Thanksgiving a month after the game and somebody's got bragging rights. So it does feel like it is more personal at times, and certainly had got more personal after this game, right? Which is a good transition into what happens. You know, Michigan wins the game, and Mike Hart makes the comments about being up on your little brother playing basketball and then taking it away from him. And as we said on the last pod, you know, he never lost to Michigan State, so he had earned the right to talk his talk.
And can we just say what he said is correct? It's how the game played out. Like, they were up, Michigan State got momentum, and then it was like, all right, it's winning time. And then the narrative around the way the game went, he described it how you would describe it. Like, the team that usually wins the game every year just won the game at the end.
I was just laughing. I thought it was funny. You know, they got excited. It's good. You know, sometimes you get your little brother excited when you're playing basketball and stuff. You let him get the lead, and then you just come back and take it back.
Do you think of Michigan State as your little brother?
Yep. So that's what they think, so that's what I think. What can I say?
It's hard to have a little brother? Or is he the little brother? I don't know. This game is an important game. This game is an important game. So they want to mock us all they want to mock us. I'm telling them it's not over. So they can print all that crap all they want all over their locker room. It's not over. It'll never be over here. It's just starting.
I think the reason that it elicited the reaction that it did from the MSU fan base and the coach, which we're going to talk about, is because there's kernels of truth in there, right? In the way it played out, and because of, as we talked about at the outset, I mean, facts are facts. Michigan had just owned the rivalry since the early 2000s, really. So, you know, his comments stung in part because there was some truth embedded in them. I see Zach shaking his head, so we'll let him respond.
Yeah, I think the comments are much different if Mike Hart just says, this is what Michigan does. We beat Michigan State. We are the number one team in this state, right? Saying that the school that, you know, considers you their rival is your little brother, you're shooing them away. You do not care about them. And that's why it matters. You know, the game itself, Michigan State lost, obviously. Mike Hart didn't have a great game. 110 rushing yards isn't, you know, pretty all that significant. It was really the Mario Manningham show. But the comment itself and the way that he said it, of course, Dantonio never saw the video, but if you watch the video, the smirk in his face, pardon my French, he knew what he was doing. And we talked about in the last pod that he was good at this, right? But to say that the team you just beat is like dangling a carrot in front of their head. You let them in a lead so they feel good about themselves, and then you go out there and you beat them. They're like your little brother. Is just a ridiculous, asinine thing to say. And I'm happy that Dantonio reacted the way he did.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, for the listeners, you can probably hear it in Zach's tone, just like you could hear it in Mark Dantonio's tone, as he literally said in his press conference that you could tell he was just mad. He was mad that they had lost, and he was mad that Mike Hart was rubbing his face in it. I mean, there's no two ways around that. And you're exactly right that Mike Hart was describing the way the game played out, but he was doing it in a way that was very intentional, right? Like, I mean, it was definitely not meant to just be a playful jab. He was trying to cut his rival, and he succeeded. Pat, you look like you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I mean, think you mentioned there's a kernel of truth. I think it's more than a kernel. And this, like, let's get heated, let's get into it. But what Mike Hart did is he rubbed it in your face that there's an inferiority complex at Michigan State, or was at this time, especially around football, but potentially just the university level itself in comparing to Michigan. And so when that's thrown in your face, look, I am a little brother, and it is infuriating to be smaller and physically dominated by your larger, older sibling. And you can't really do anything about it until you get older, and you're just kind of waiting and biding your time. In my case, I've never been as big as my older brother, so he's always been bigger than me. And so I think I mean, like, the comparison hit and made everyone so mad because of the truth. And, like, I'm sorry, it's just the way it was. Now, the fact that you used that, Dantonio is genius, use it as a motivating factor to basically center his entire program and build it around, like, we're slighted and we're going to outwork you, and, you know, we have just as much talent, and we can dominate physically and all this stuff. So, you know, he used it.
Yeah, to the point Pat just made, and to honestly end up spinning this into a positive for Michigan State, like, if you actually break down what that little brother comment is talking about, is the older younger brother dynamic is something that is controlled purely by age, right? It's just like strictly a calendar thing. It doesn't actually reflect, after a certain point, it doesn't actually reflect a certain level of competency, skill, size, you know. And to the point Pat just made, Dantonio was able to flip the script and essentially say, yeah, we might be the younger brother, but 5 years from now, they are the bigger brother, right? They're not maybe not by age, but in all the other ways that matter. And so, you know, that the comment is just like such a perfect encapsulation of the rivalry, both the comment and the response and how it played out, because I think both fan bases can kind of look at it and find the things that they want to see in it. Looking back on it, it just feels like a turning point, because Dantonio's response was unlike what John L. had said in past games after Michigan State had lost. I mean, he didn't run away from it. He was just like, yeah, this sucks. I'm legitimately mad at this 21-year-old. And, you know, he's like making comments about his height. I mean, he literally says, he goes like this, for the listeners, I'm like making the hand motion of judging height. He's like, does Mike Hart have a little brother, making fun of his height? You could tell it wasn't manufactured. It was authentic. He was just legitimately mad and was going to use it as fuel, and that's exactly how it ended up playing out. And I do think it's important, because, you know, we started out talking a little bit about the John L. era and the records, but it's not just that the teams were mediocre. It's that this script of having leads, letting them slip away, you know, they had this moniker of same old Sparty, right? Like, Sparty, for a game or two, they were the team that in 1998 could go into the shoe and beat Ohio State, and then a week later lose to Indiana. And it was like, you know what? They have the talent, but they can't put it together. The John L. Smith seasons were, Pat touched on it, in 2005, they started 4-0. 2006, they started, I think, 3-0, and then Notre Dame comes to Spartan Stadium, and Michigan State is up, I think, 3 touchdowns at one point, and definitely up 17 in the second half, and they blow that game and proceed to lose the next 3 in a row and only win one more game the rest of the year. So there was just this ingrained feeling that the other shoe was kind of about to drop on Michigan State football in this period. And in that 2007 game against Michigan, the other shoe did drop. And then Dantonio was like, F this. Like, we're not going to accept this. We're not going to just like pretend like, oh, we'll get them next time, or do the usual platitudes about trying to, improve around the edges. He was like, no, we're pissed, and we're going to embrace it. I know that reflected your feeling, and I know you were there for the game I just talked about in 2006. Like, talk about how you felt about both the 2006 collapse and then just like the way Dantonio kind of embraced both the rivalry and like trying to turn the page.
So a bit to unpack there. I'll do my best, Kenny. Specifically, the 2006 game was at the game, had real nice seats. And we went up big on Notre Dame and just decided to, never run the ball again. It was just a disaster. I remember specifically Notre Dame fans were leaving the stadium, and I was telling them to keep praying because they were walking up the aisles with their hands like this. And of course, we ended up losing. Just ridiculous. Just so stupid. That 2006 season was also the year that I think Michigan State still holds the record for largest comeback victory against Northwestern. So it really encapsulates the John L. Smith experience, where you can have the highest highs and the lowest lows, and you might experience them both in the same game. So
hold on, let me jump in on that, and then we'll let you come back to the Dantonio point, because you're right. I'm looking at the game looks. Like I said, they lose to Notre Dame, and then they lose 3 straight games. They lose to Michigan and Ohio State in games that aren't particularly close. And then they win 41-38 against Northwestern. To Zach's point, they were down, I think, 35-3 in that game. They come back and win. And the highlights are wild. It's just like all of a sudden Drew Stanton turns into like a combination of Mike Vick and Peyton Manning. He's just dropping dimes. I mean, it helps when you're playing Northwestern in the mid-2000s. So they have this wild comeback, and you're like, well, maybe they're going to turn their season around, and they proceed to lose the next 4 games in a row. So, 2 separate 4-game losing streaks interspersed by a miracle comeback overtime victory against Northwestern. That's John L. Smith at Michigan State. So, okay, back to Dantonio.
Yeah, not even an overtime victory. They just straight up won the game in regular time. Just 24 points scored in the fourth quarter. Just ridiculous. So Dantonio, and I think I forgot your original question there, Kenny. So if you can refresh me, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know you were all in on embracing the rivalry with Michigan, and those Dantonio comments probably, I mean, he probably was speaking for the MSU fan base, but like specifically speaking for Zach Jewett in that exact moment.
Yeah, there's no question about it. There's few things I love more than just a retort like that, where it gets right to the point, and it fires people up right. Well, we're never gonna forget this, that's spliced into every MSU sort of promo thing on Instagram and silly people's videos. It's the best. It's literally the best. And that idea encapsulates how I totally feel about the Michigan State game. There's no game I would rather win more than that game. There's no game I'd rather win by a larger margin than that game. I want to destroy Michigan every time we play them. I cannot stand that team. So yeah, when he said that, it was the greatest thing I've ever heard in years.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at the contrast of, so I think what a coach says in a press conference usually means very little. Like some coaches are like incredible at just saying like the same things no matter what happens, so there's nothing can be used. And this is one of the rare times where like what a coach says like kind of defines the program. But the contrast from John L. Smith, all these teams lost a lot of close games, usually had talented competitive teams, recruited okay, and had a ton of collapses late. Team that just seemed like it just didn't have confidence as a team. Him in press conference slapping himself compared compared to Dantonio, like, I mean, I don't remember if he was slamming the table, but that's like kind of the difference. Like slapping himself versus like staring at you, like, no. And you said, Kenny, like maybe Dantonio was speaking for the whole fan base. I think at that time, he might have been speaking more for his team. As a first-year coach trying to build a program, I think he's sending a message to his players that they're going to hear over and over again. They're going to see in the media, and that's why it was smart. I don't know that it was as strategic as it ended up being. Like, Dantonio's obviously a brilliant coach, and he knows what he's doing in football. But I think maybe it was just a competitive reaction. Zach will really despise this story because I'm comparing Dantonio to Jim Harbaugh. But John Harbaugh tells this story. He's the big brother, right? Jim's his younger brother. And growing up, I'm sure John always kind of dominated Jim in all the sports, and they famously would wrestle and play baseball and all this stuff and compete. And John tells a story. They were in Florida, and Jim had just been drafted into the NFL. And Jim was like, John's probably a grad assistant somewhere with zero money. And now his younger brother has all this money. He's a professional athlete. So he brings the whole family, I think it was Florida, like on a vacation, pays for everybody. And they're like swimming in the ocean, and Jim like manhandles John, and probably doing what John did to him when they were, 10, 12 years old, but like kind of drowning him in the ocean. And John realizes physically there's nothing I can do. My little brother has surpassed me. And famously, John tells the story as it motivated him to win a Super Bowl, to get something over Jim. And like, that's their competitive relationship. Now, my comparison to that is like, that's Dantonio as a competitor. No, we're going to fight back. You are not going to manhandle us. You are not going to dominate us. We're on a even with you at least. And we're going to, work to be better.
Yeah. So the ocean encounter is the 2014 game versus Michigan State and Michigan in this analogy, right?
Yeah, I mean, Dantonio got his program there, right? Like, they eventually physically overwhelmed Michigan at the line of scrimmage during those Brady Hoke years. So, yeah. I mean, it got there.
I just remember this, though it was, I guess, almost 20 years ago now, so my memory could be wrong. But I remember talking to you, Pat. You were like, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's galvanizing, but like, do we think that setting the standard as we're going to beat Michigan is smart for MSU? And because, at the time, we hadn't won in like 6 years, right? And you were not wrong about this. You're like, Michigan's in the midst of, frankly, a down season, and we still won, right? And like, is Dantonio just sort of setting himself up for failure by sort of laying this marker down that this is what he's going to focus on? Now, obviously, in hindsight, it's easy to be like, that's a silly way to think about it because of point about what he's really trying to do with the team.
I think what that stemmed from is MSU kept having seasons where they started good, were ranked, there's a lot of hype, lose to Michigan, fall off a cliff. So it was like you set the season up as if we don't beat Michigan, the season's over. And so it's
which is how it had played out for several years, right?
So do you want to continue to do that? And turns out, yes, because then you win that game and it springboards you. Right.
Well, and I do think that we've spent a lot of time talking about that game. And I do think as we think about the Dantonio era, what I think was, so we should back up maybe a little bit. When they hired Dantonio, I don't think that the MSU fan base was like completely overjoyed. It wasn't like a slam dunk hire. He wasn't a hot name in coaching. He had MSU ties, which I think people were excited about. He had coached under Saban, but at Cincinnati, he had been 7-5 in 2004, 4-7 in 2005, 7-5 in 2006. So you're just like, okay, you're kind of putting together these middling seasons at a middling program in Cincinnati. Like, where exactly is the upside here? And I will say that coming out of that game, the fact that MSU rallied to beat Purdue and beat Penn State to be bowl eligible was maybe the first sign for MSU fans that like, okay, we've got at least got a coach that can like right the ship and that can keep the team together in the face of adversity, because that was the thing with John L. was just like the minute they dealt with a minor injury or they lost a game. You were just waiting for the wheels to fall off. But I don't think that it was I don't think that it was a slam dunk that he was going to be successful after that first year. Again, they were at 5-5 coming out of that game.
Yeah, but when I look back at this season, I didn't know at the time. I wasn't paying that close attention, but they were better than their record, right? They lost close games to number 1 Ohio State, number 9 Wisconsin, 37-34, number 1 Ohio State, 24-17, Iowa at Iowa, which is like an impossible place to win by a touchdown. Like, so they were in all these games and competitive in a way that bad teams are not. So, like,
sure,
if you're sticking with all these good teams, and even the Michigan game, they lose, but clearly they were on a similar level as far as their ability. And so, yeah, you only go 7-5 and even lose the bowl game, but, like, it's not like they won 7 games against bad teams with a bunch of them being close and then got blown out,
right,
3-4 times.
Yeah. To jump on that a little bit, Pat, I think the combined losing margin was only 33 points for Michigan State, which is right around a touchdown, maybe a little less than a touchdown for those games. And I want to say the largest loss in those was like 13 or 14 points, so that swung it a bit, right? Kind of coupled with that, we didn't know it at the time, but this became a hallmark of Dantonio teams, is that the game after Michigan mattered just as much as the Michigan game to him. There wasn't going to be a letdown for those post-Michigan games. And of course, in 07, they go to Purdue and beat them by 17. That's a statement. It doesn't matter if it's Purdue. That's still a statement, right? You get have a heartbreaker, then you go on the road and you win.
Yeah, and Purdue was not who they are now, right? That was Joe Tiller. I think that Purdue team I looked up was 8-5. So yeah, getting that win, coming off the loss was a nice sign for MSU teams. And again, I don't mean to imply that he was like on the hot seat at this point. It was just that he didn't come in with like all the hype that, and maybe some of this is just the way that MSU was as a program, where that frankly, after the John L. Smith hire, they weren't really in a position to attract like the hottest coaching names out there in the same way that when this didn't turn out well, but when they moved on from Dantonio, they went and got Mel Tucker and people were like, oh, what a great get. Turns out you don't need to buy into the hype to measure success. Go ahead, Zach.
I remember specifically talking to you about the Dantonio hire when it happened, and I can recall what I said. I said, I've never heard of this guy. Does Cincinnati even have a football team where, like, who cares about Cincinnati football? And he ends up being I call him Michigan State's greatest coach ever, right? So yeah, the 2007 season, what a turning point for Michigan State football.
Yeah,
and
so
there it is. Now we get to the whole reason why we chose to spend 3 hours talking about these two teams, so we can talk about the turning point of Michigan State football.
Yep. We are on brand. What can I say, Zach and I? We will move on from that specific game, but I've got one more bit of trivia for you guys specific to that game. How many seasons of NFL quarterback play were present on the two rosters for Michigan and Michigan State in that game?
I know Hoyer was a 13-year NFL vet, and Henny had to have been longer, right? Because he's only stopped playing like last year or recently.
Yeah, so
there's a lot 35.
There's probably
how many? How many did you say?
35 is my guess.
No, way more than that. I bet there's like over 70.
Yeah, so
because Nick Foles is on the roster.
Yeah. So I'll give you guys. So Pat went a little high. It's 60 by my count. Now I just Googled real quick. This is just them on rosters. Maybe some of this is practice squads. Henny, 15 NFL seasons. Hoyer, 15 NFL seasons. Cousins was a redshirt freshman on this team. He didn't appear in any games in 2007, but he was on the roster. He's at 13 seasons. Foles, 11 seasons. And even Ryan Mallett was in the NFL for 6 years. So I obviously, this is not something that I have the time or inclination to research, but like I cannot imagine that you could find a college football game between two teams that combined to win 16 games that had 60 seasons of NFL quarterback play. Maybe if you go back to like the pre-scholarship limit era where it was only a handful of teams, but yeah, for two roughly middle of the pack Big Ten teams, very well represented over the next decade in the NFL, which is crazy.
There's a few teams, like I bet Oklahoma played somebody that had 2 NFL quarterbacks on when they had like 3. Didn't they have like Murray, Mayfield, and like all those guys are still in the NFL racking up seasons?
Yeah, so maybe Sam Brett.
And there's probably an Ohio State quarterback room that's going to be up there soon when they had like Burrow and Ewer, like they had all those dudes. I don't know.
Oh yeah,
they were all together, but there's like Fields and Burrow.
Yeah,
and, a bunch of them.
Crucially, those teams didn't go 7-5 or 7-6.
Right.
Yeah.
Losing to Boston College in the Champ Sports Bowl.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought that was a fun fact. So because let's segue a little bit into like more modern college football. So we talked about this being interesting because it is Dantonio's first year. And then on the last pod, we talked about how the year after this, Michigan had a new coach. Both of our schools, Michigan and Michigan State, in this past season had first-year coaches. So like, looking at the way MSU's season played out, we'll start with you, Pat. Like, do you think there's lessons there?
Yeah, it's hard. It's kind of hard to suss out. Like, if you try to compare Dantonio to Sharon Moore, you're looking at a team coming off a national championship with incredible talent versus a 4-8 team that was getting blown out in a bunch of games. So one is just the expectation is like competency, and the other one, at which Dantonio did, right? They 7-6, made a bowl game. 7 wins is, like Zach said, he's pretty happy if they'll win like a floor of 7. So immediately got them there to competency. Whereas Sharon was tasked with it's harder. You're coming off a national championship. What are the expectations? Are still going to be really high because the previous regime has built a program that, got to the apex. So there, I think it's hard. I do think that there's probably some similarities of going through transition struggles and then not losing the team and having some good results late in the season. Though that does seem like something I would hope shows that Sharon knows what he's doing. I do think you talked about the hype or the lack thereof around Dantonio. I think it's pretty funny to think about fan sentiment around hires of coaches and just how often we are wrong. Famously, Michigan, there was a lot of hype around Rich Rodriguez modernizing the offense, and that failed spectacularly. And then Michigan then goes the other way. They go with Brady Hoke as a hire who has basically from the get-go, people were skeptical because he had such a mediocre career leading up to that. And, had never been a coordinator famously. And so that's kind of the lack of hype actually was kind of warranted there. Then he has this great season in the first year. And then all of a sudden everyone's hyped. Hey, maybe it's going to be great. So then you do this. The next thing is like, how much can you take away even from 1 year of results?
Yeah, I think maybe the nicer parallel here is just Michigan State to Michigan State, and mostly because what you're saying, Pat, is Michigan's coming off a national championship, and so how many one school a year can say that, right? A lot of schools can say they had a mediocre year and then they fired their coach and they started a new season. I think an interesting parallel too is the coach's reaction to losing the Michigan game when we talked about it in the last pod, where there was seemingly some growth and some thought, and that he's not going to take the game. He's going to take the game way more seriously than he thought he should have. And I forgot his exact quote, but he had some reflection on it and thought about it. Obviously not the fire and sort of like passion that Dantonio had at the time, but I liked the response just the same. Maybe I'm getting old and soft in my age, but I think there's something there where you have that game and you need to win it. You need to take it seriously. You need to punch Michigan in the face. And that's something that matters for Michigan State fans and Michigan State football. Yeah,
good points. I agree that I think the Michigan State comparison is a little smoother for all the reasons Zach just said. One thing Pat said, even though, like I said, at the end of this 2007 season, we were sort of excited that Dantonio had kind of righted the ship to get them to a bowl game, and they were competitive in those games. It is still really hard to know. And looking through his tenure, so in 2000, the next year they go 9-4, and obviously now it's like, okay, maybe we've really got something here. But in 2009, they beat Montana State in a game that doesn't officially count because they are like 1AA or whatever, and then they lose to Central and lose to Notre Dame and lose to Wisconsin. And so now they're in year 3 and he is 1-3. And I wouldn't say that people were like calling for him to be fired at that point. They had just come off a good season and people remembered the John L. seat, but the seat was definitely like warming up a little bit. And ironically, it was like the offense was pretty successful with Brian Hoyer and Javon Ringer. And there was a little bit of a sense of like, well, now that the talent, he doesn't have, as it turns out, a 15-year NFL vet in Hoyer as the quarterback, where is the program going to go? But importantly, they start 1-3, and then it's almost like the script has flipped. They beat Michigan in that next game, and he sort of turns that season around to some extent, although they still finished 6-7. And it's really the next year when Cousins really comes into his own, that the Dantonio era that we all sort of think about as their dominant run really gets started. But it can just take time, right? And, in today's college football climate, it's interesting how much time are major programs willing to give their coaches to kind of go through some of those growing pains. Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, no, I was just hoping that you had mentioned that Dantonio won that game in 09, and not to get off the 07 train here a ton, but that's why the 07 season mattered so much, and why that comment from Michael Hart mattered as well, is that this really spurred Michigan State football. It propelled us forward. It truly did. It
was
took
the
a sort of
turning point. Yeah,
it was it really was. It really was. We won 4 Michigan State games in a row.
You're right. It was.
Kenny and I were at that 09 football game, and Larry Caper darting for 23 yards for the touchdown in overtime. Kenny lifted me up like I weighed like 6 pounds, and he military pressed me over his head.
Yeah, we did the lifting him up like he was in Dirty Dancing.
it was ridiculous.
Don't put ZJ in an MSU football corner.
That's right.
Well, now we've had a chance to talk about multiple MSU victories over Michigan, so this pod is really
that's enough of that. I did want to circle back a little bit just to Dantonio's press conference response. Maybe this isn't as much on your radar as Michigan State fans, but he came up under Jim Tressel at Ohio State. The program at Ohio State was awesome all through the 90s, but they kept losing to Michigan. It was the thorn in their side. It was basically the reason Tressel got the job was just, we have to beat Michigan. And Dantonio is on his staff. His press conference at the basketball game, or not press conference, his appearance at Ohio State basketball game, he talked about how the Ohio State fan base was going to be proud of their team, especially in November the following year when they played that school up north. And that's how he set the tone of his program. So earlier I said I wasn't sure how much of it was strategic by Dantonio, but actually now that I think about it, I bet he had planned to make some sort of comment about how it'll never be over, about how how important the rivalry was, because that's what his mentor did at Ohio State, and it was basically the same scenario. And Mike Hart teed it up for him in a way that made it, even more effective, get more press coverage. You were bringing up modern football, Kenny, and I was thinking about this. So would something like this even matter now? Because back then you were building your program. You wanted your freshmen and sophomores and juniors to come back the next year with a will and a drive to win that game. Now you just go recruit from the transfer portal and bring in the most talented guys who fit your system and you can win with. Will we see anything like this? I mean, is this kind of that era of college football is over?
I think I'm going to jump in here real quick. I think that part of it it kind of it'd be amplified a bit with just the modern sort of social media, where it would be a really sort of fun thing on Blue Sky or Twitter or Instagram or TikTok and whatever else. But yeah, at the same time, we've talked about it a few times, of course, and I keep saying that we've talked about it, but it's because all of this stuff is sort of cyclical in that when you're looking back in the past and talking about the future, things have changed naturally. And that you don't have the same sort of passion for some of these rivalries that you might when you have players that are staying at a school for numerous years, when they're just coming in as mercenaries year after year. It is what it is. Hopefully we win, but we might not. I'll get someone new.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And Zach, I think your point ties back to what you said about the current John Smith, right? And I think that's probably why, again, without the fire of Dantonio, but I think probably part of why he wanted to acknowledge the rivalry is, I think, maybe in part because the players do feel more transitory, but the fan bases don't, right? Like the game is still, to your point, it's the game you circle at the start of the year for MSU football in your green pen. And so the game still matters to the fan bases. And I think probably the players can probably feel that on the field. I mean, I bet it probably feels bigger than just a run-of-the-mill game, but has it lost a little bit of the edge of, we talked a little bit around the last pod where you're watching those freshmen and sophomores maybe play on special teams, get their taste of the rivalry, watch their peers, their friends win or lose, and really start to ingrain that just distaste for their rival. I just don't know that I don't think you can like manufacture that with anything but time. I mean, I think you've got to like play the team a few times to really dig into that, and to get that feeling of this game matters more because it matters more to our fans and because we've been going against these guys for 2, 3, 4 years, where now, it's just a lot harder to find a guy. I mean, maybe we can do the exercise. I'll have to look. Like, I wonder how many players on Michigan State's roster will be playing in their third or fourth game against Michigan this year. It can't be that many given all the turnover that they've had. So I do think that the portal and the NIL climate have changed the way those rivalries function. And I was going to actually talk about the modern era in that same context too, because I think the playoff contributes to that too, in the sense that, and I know this is, both of you guys feel pretty strongly about this, that, Pat talked about how the Michigan State game was sort of like they had to beat Michigan State to make the game at the end of the year against Ohio State really meaningful. Like, you think about the 2006 year that we talked about, that Michigan State team wasn't very good, but had Michigan lost to Michigan State, they go into that game against Ohio State, and that game it doesn't mean nearly as much. They're not playing for a spot in the national title in the same way that they would be. And now, that is even more so with the expanded playoff rules. So I don't know which of you wants to jump in on that. I know you both feel pretty strongly about what the college football playoff is doing to those rivalries.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick here, and mostly because my point on the expanded college football is short, and this is maybe the silliest possible take about it, but bring me back to the mid-90s where it's like, all right, we're just going to play bowl games, we're going to have differing styles on these teams that are playing in these bowl games, and there might not be a unanimous national champion. Big whoop, in my opinion. Obviously, that's not how TV ratings or, maybe more modern fan bases care. But yeah, it's just that the playoff this year it was like, oh my God, why are some of these teams in this? This is just mental.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree with you, Zach. I think that they're ruining the greatest American sport. Yeah, it may be a better TV product if you're a casual fan of football. There might be more games that are interesting for you to watch.
Say you're a fan of the Arizona State Sun Devils, perhaps.
Yeah, well,
even casually.
Much better for them this year. But yeah, in general, like, you didn't ever have very many big games. You played Arizona. Nobody really cared nationally. That was your game. And unless you were going to the Rose Bowl, which they weren't really very often. So I think that they're sacrificing the importance of each week rivalry games and regular season games for ratings and TV money. And it might be fine in the short term, but I don't know if in 20 years they will have fans who care as much about what happened 20 years ago in the way we do about our schools. Like, I think college football had like niche fandom, but it had the most passionate fans in all of North American sports. And I think they're going to lose some of that passion. Part of it is the transfer portal. You pull for a guy that you watched grow and get better and make plays. We're talking about 2007 Michigan State Spartans. I'm surprised we didn't talk about the defense at all, but a freshman on that team, Greg Jones. Like, I'm not a Spartan fan, but is he one of the best Spartans of your lifetime? 4 years of just being awesome. 3 wins over Michigan, pretty dominant in all of those games, just destroying quarterbacks. Like, what in the new era is he even spend 4 years at Michigan State? Does he, he probably goes to Alabama after 2 years to get a bigger paycheck, and you don't get that. And, maybe not, maybe I'm wrong, but I do think that there's a threat there to what made the sport great being eroded.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and it is a great point on Greg Jones. And I also think this is maybe even more of like an old guy get off my lawn take, right? But I do think, and I'm all for players, like I'm not against players getting NIL money. Like, I think that that's great. They're obviously the sport is generating billions of dollars, right? So like having the players have a chance to participate in that is great, but it does just change the nature of our relationship with them as fans, and particularly when we're not in college anymore, but there when I was in school, there was a sense that the guys on the team were, they were like my classmates. Like, I literally, my freshman year at MSU, I lived in a dorm that had like 4 or 5 football players on the hall. And like, I can't say I was like close friends with them. I wasn't like hanging out with them, but I'd say hello. Like, we were friendly enough, and it like makes you sort of feel like they are really like part of your school. And I think that ingrains a level of passion that is a little bit different. Now, there can still be tons of passion surrounding sports. I mean, we're all Lions fans, and we have all been extremely hyped for this Lions run. But it does feel a little different. And even the Lions rivalries, like, we all can't stand the Packers, we can't stand the Bears, but you do not hear the level of vitriol in Zach's voice when he's talking about the Packers as you do when he starts talking about Michigan. Like, it is just a different level of passion and fandom. And I think that's, I don't think you can separate that from what you were talking about, Pat, in that there's something tied to that, in the sense that for the longest time in college football, like for Michigan or Michigan State in the peak Dantonio years, if they lost the game that year, the season wasn't like ruined, but the expectations changed all of a sudden, right? It was like, now the biggest goal for the season is no longer out there, and it really like heightens that you've just got to win those games. If the Lions lose one game to the Packers, that's annoying, but their season isn't over. It's just you're on to the next week. Keep the grind going.
Yeah. So circling back a little bit, like you mentioned about Arizona State, there are teams out there that don't have a lot of seasons, don't have national championship aspirations. And maybe with the new playoff, with all the teams that get a chance, you have more teams that wouldn't have had a chance at a national championship, but care because making the playoff is enough of a, you have a chance, you're in the tournament. And so we're going to care about what happens in this game, week 11 and week 12. More teams are kind of in the mix. And so I understand that argument. The issue is, if you were a team that had true national championship aspirations, every single week was the playoff. And that's what made, like, Michigan losing to Appalachian State in 2007 wouldn't even be a big deal anymore. Like, if they win all the rest of their games, they win. That's what Ohio State just did. They lost to Michigan kind of in a spectacular failure, like embarrassing fashion at home, and then got to be national champions. Like, so we removed every week having the most extreme urgency, and that's what made the sport so great. And so once you remove that, I still care. It's too deep embedded in me. Maybe over time it'll fade. I still care a lot, but I feel it inching away. And you mentioned about NIL. I think the players should get paid for sure. I think they just need to do something about the portal. You can't have, it would be less fun to watch the Lions if half the team, the guys I rooted for the previous season, left and we're on a different team every year.
Yeah.
Like, it's devastating when you lose a major contributor as a free agent now. And in college football, you can lose, you lose some every year to graduation. That was always a part of it. So there was always this kind of finite way to look at it, and team building that was pretty interesting. Like, okay, well, that guy's about to graduate. So even though he's a little better this season, we're probably not going to, compete for the Big Ten title. So I'd actually like to see that younger quarterback so he can start to get reps to develop for next year. And now it's like, why? Why play the younger quarterback? Just recruit somebody else from another team. Who cares if that guy's good? We don't need to develop. Like, it's a totally different team building era.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah.
I agree completely. Can't say anything negative about that.
Yeah,
Pat?
you're so happy with me because I brought up Greg Jones.
Yeah, look, no bigger fan of Greg Jones, so much so that I made T-shirts of Greg Jones. So yeah, I mean, go ahead, Kenny.
Yeah, I was going to say a classic T-shirt, but I was going to say that the point you just made, Pat, about and for the listeners who don't know, we're jokingly picking on Arizona State because our mutual friend Jerry is a newfound Sun Devils fan. So we don't actually hold any grudge towards them, but since he's not here to defend himself, we're going to take some shots at the Sun Devils. Though the erasure of the Jake Plummer era by Pat, saying that they've never had any relevant players, seems a bit extreme. Anyway, I do think, it's true that having the playoff out there as an opportunity for teams is something. And maybe at some point we will get like a true Cinderella who makes their way through 3 rounds of the playoff. I think it's pretty unlikely. It's just such a different sport than college basketball that doesn't feel like what we should necessarily even be striving for in football. But I suppose it's possible. But I was gonna go back to something Zach said about the 90s is that, like Arizona State under the old system could have still had the Rose Bowl to play for, right? Like maybe they weren't going to play for the national championship in the old days, but there were these traditional big carrots out there that made teams care. And we've been talking about the Dantonio era. So the 2013 Michigan State team is a great example of that. And it's a great example of both, where on the one hand, if you ask an MSU fan about the officiating in the Notre Dame game, they will say it cost us a chance to play for the national title because of a couple of pass interference calls. We lose a close game, we win out, and we end up going to the Rose Bowl. But as mad as we were about the outcome of that Notre Dame game, the fan base was not disappointed. I mean, some of that was because there was a lot of pent up time. It had been like more than 20 years since Michigan State had played in a Rose Bowl, but it was a huge event and a huge accomplishment. And that was the last year of the BCS, right? So MSU wasn't playing for a national title in that game, but I still remember almost every big play from that game with clarity and remember it being just like a watershed moment for MSU fans and for the Spartans. And then in 2015, MSU gets into the playoff, and I actually went to that game, and it was fun to be part of the experience, but Alabama just obliterated us. I will say that game was a little closer in the first half than the final score indicated, but we weren't really, there was a chance that we could have kept the game a little closer. I don't think we were ever really like threatening to win that game. The other team was just loaded. But if you ask me if I could do it over, I would have gone to the Rose Bowl and, skipped the playoff despite it being quote unquote playing for the national championship. And that's not just like results oriented, I don't think. I mean, the whole atmosphere surrounding that Rose Bowl just sounds like it was basically the best weekend in MSU football in decades. Not everything has to be. You don't have to be playing for quote unquote playing for the national championship in the postseason for it to have some meaning.
Not to rub it into two Michigan State fans, but I actually went to the Michigan State Rose Bowl and they beat Stanford. So I lived in Southern California and my parents were visiting. And so my parents are like, if you ask them if they're Michigan or Michigan State fans, they would be like, we're both. I don't know. Some people try to toe that line, I guess. But they've had kids go to, I guess, more kids go to Michigan, but they have a bunch of grandkids at State. So they, and my dad has like a bunch of brothers who are huge Michigan State guys. So they wanted to go. So I was like, yeah, let's get tickets. Let's go. So we went to that Rose Bowl game, and yeah, it was like a classic Dantonio victory too. That kind of was like a culmination of his career. I bet if you asked him, he'd probably bring up the bunch of the Michigan victories, that season's victory over Ohio State, which was incredible, and then that Rose Bowl game. I mean, those were probably, maybe some of the Notre Dame wins were pretty special too, but that Rose Bowl game, I mean, he'll always have that, right? Like winning a Rose Bowl it didn't necessarily mean you were the national champion, but it was absolutely something to brag about. And now, if it's not a part of the playoff, it's kind of an afterthought. I'll take this time to say I've been to 3 Rose Bowls, 2 Michigan, 1 Michigan State. The first one, January 1st, 2007, USC dominated. We talked about that one, dominated the second half, passing. Then I went to the Michigan State game. Michigan State won, beat Stanford. Michigan seemed very far away. But then I went in just the 2024 Rose Bowl on January 1st to watch them beat Alabama, which is the greatest game I've ever been to in person. Best atmosphere. There's I don't know, there's something about the collective experience of college football. Maybe this happens for other people at other sporting events, but yeah, I had some beverages, but you feel a high in a way that is, you don't even need it. And then to win that game in the spectacular fashion that they did was just that was the greatest experience of my Michigan fandom. And you feel this high from it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, so I had prompted you guys for that question. Pat's now already answered it. Anything else you want to say on the playoff, Zach? Or I'll pose the same question to you about, since we've spent a lot of time talking about college football, Pat kind of touched on why it's what's his most memorable game. What's the most memorable game you've been at in your Spartan fandom?
Yeah, I will say that Dantonio probably would have benefited quite a bit from the expanded playoff. I think he would have been primed for some playoff games, but at the same time, I think the playoff is just pointless. And I do want to also add, in spite of being one of the more passionate MSU fans, with it was so silly to not go to that Rose Bowl game. Lex was like, "I don't care, go." I was like, "I can't afford it. Got to fly out there. It's expensive as hell. Don't have that much money right now." It's one of the worst life decisions I've made.
Big time. I feel the same way about it, and I was in the same thing where I had gone on vacation in November or something like that. So I was broke but in hindsight, should have just put that on a credit card.
Get those Sky Miles, dog.
Right. Made the responsible decision, which was not the correct decision.
Which was
instead
incorrect.
of you guys going bananas in the crowd as MSU comes up with an amazing defensive stop to win the game, it was just me with my arms crossed watching.
I wish I would have just seen that. That would have made my life.
We were on such a positive note. You guys were aligned in your shared appreciation for Greg Jones, and now we're back to being grumpy.
So it's tough to pick a favorite Michigan State game that I've watched. The Little Giants game, Kenny, that was incredible. We were at that together. The Michigan minus 48 rushing yards game in, I believe, 2013, where Calhoun repeatedly abused Taylor. Also, we were at that game together. That was a sort of peak Dantonio where we're gonna murder you, right? And I think Narduzzi got in trouble actually because he was saying that they wanted Michigan State players to hurt Michigan players. I think he got in trouble by the Big Ten or something along those lines. I'm sure Taylor was crying after the game about it. I think
or Gardner. Devin Gardner. You thinking of that game?
Yeah, it was Taylor Lewan was the offensive tackle though.
The offensive lineman. Oh yeah. Okay.
And yeah, Devin Gardner was the quarterback at the time. I think my favorite game, Kenny, it shouldn't be, but it is, and it's got to be the Kenneth Walker game. There's just no finer experience. When Pat talked about when you're at a college football game and the crowd is going wild, the high you feel, that was 100% experienced in that game. Watching that play out, the euphoria I experienced where we're coming back. Oh, another 35-yard touchdown run. Oh my God. Oh, we have the lead. Are you kidding me? And then an interception to end the game and seal it. It was really sort of the opposite of the 2007 MSU UM game. But instead of losing, we won, and that feeling is indescribable. That was such a fun time. That was a great tailgate that we threw, Kenny. Just a beautiful day in spite of the rain. My wife was spraying champagne on everyone at the tailgates. It's just incredible scenes. Limbs, as they say in Scotland, England, etc.
What's your game, Kenny?
Yeah, so. Well, I was going to ask Pat if there was a home game that stood out, because I do think that home atmosphere that Zach talked about for that 2021 game, that was probably the most raucous I can ever remember Spartan Stadium being. And it was both because we were playing Michigan, both the stakes were exceptionally high going into that game. And it was also that 2021 season was the first year back from COVID. So nobody had been in the stands in 2020. So atmosphere wise, that one really stands out. Zach and I have been debating this, and this is sort of embarrassing about exactly what our behavior was like in 2010. I was not at the Little Giants game I was not in the stadium. I watched that in PTs because I remember turning and taunting our friend Zane, who's a Notre Dame fan. I think you were at that game with your cousin or something like that. The game that I remember being at with you is the Rocket game, the Hail Mary from Kirk Cousins to Keith Nickel against Wisconsin. But I'm glad you brought those up. And then the only other one that honestly really stands out in my mind is actually a game MSU lost, but I remember walking out of it being that was just a wildly entertaining football game. If my team hadn't been involved, I would have probably been one of the greater games I've ever watched. It was the Big Ten championship game in 2011 against Wisconsin that MSU ran the punt back to the 4, would have set them up first and goal with a chance to take the lead. Instead, they called running into the kicker, and the game ended on a penalty. So it was one of those games where you're walking out what just happened. It felt like we were about to win the game. But even before that, the teams were really loaded. Wisconsin had Monty Ball. They had Russell Wilson as their quarterback. Kirk Cousins was the MSU quarterback. That was the game that he threw the out to Keith Nickel, who then, as he was falling out of bounds, just pitched it to Keyshawn Martin. So there were just wild plays, and the game was 42-39. It was back and forth, and it was just one of those things where I was like, wow, this is the most fun I've ever had, just watching two teams go back and forth. I think it probably helped that Wisconsin's fan base just notoriously full of mostly nice people who like to just drink beer. So the stadium was super happy. Everybody was walking out. The Wisconsin fans were like, damn, that was an incredible game. We're sorry you guys lost that way. And it's we don't really want your sympathy, but also we appreciate your being nice. So yeah, that one stands out for whatever reason. But well, I guess I asked Pat a question and then I just rambled on about a bunch of football games. Pat, is there a Michigan home game that stands out to you?
It's the 2004 Halloween Braylon Edwards game.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
Pretty analogous, for Michigan fans, what Zach was talking about with Kenneth Walker. It was just one player took over a game in a way that was so exciting, and he was so unstoppable. That was really fun. That's probably the home game that was the greatest that I had a lot of fun winning at Notre Dame. I was in the stands for that in 2006. Our mutual friend Billy Potoff went to Notre Dame, went and stayed with him Friday night before the game. One of his buddies was a Notre Dame kicker, and he had an extra ticket, so I got a ticket from the Notre Dame kicker, and I was sitting in the Notre Dame parent section, just like drunk and obnoxious, and Michigan dominated, and it was really fun.
Yeah, that's a good memory. All right, well, I mean, we've talked a lot. I guess the only thing I was thinking about as Zach was talking about the Little Giants and the Rocket game is, I guess we'll bring it a little bit full circle. It is just wild how confidence and culture can sort of change the program, because, as I said, for the John L. era and a lot of the 90s, the reputation for Michigan State was like the opposite, that they were just going to find ways to blow games that they had leads in. And then somewhere along the way, Dantonio had this magic where it was just like, you never felt like they were out of the game. And you always felt like when it came down to having to make a key play, a Hail Mary, a fake field goal, the Cotton Bowl game where they blocked the kick, his tenure was just sort of like strewn with that. And, you know, I don't know. That's the part about college football. It's sports in general, but college football in particular, where, you know, like, the analytics people would say those sorts of plays are just like sort of variance or luck or whatever, right? Like, you can't just like count on those things. But as somebody who watched MSU go through these cycles, there at some point you have a team and a culture that keeps moving forward, and they just find a way to make plays in those situations. And that's what leads to a lot of those games. I'm sure Pat would say the same thing about watching the iterations of various Michigan teams, of teams that find ways to lose versus teams that you just have faith that are eventually you're going to find a way to get the job done. So that's what makes all this fun, I think.
Yeah, and that's what's important about the 2007 team, Kenny, is that it was a real culture shift for Michigan State football. There was nothing impressive about it. They had some wins or whatever, but a 7-6 season isn't like it. No one's really, bouncing their grandkids on their knees and be like, remember that 7-6 Michigan State football team? No, they're going to
just us for the last 90 minutes.
Well, maybe 15 of the 90 minutes. But what happened after that is kind of what mattered the most, right? Is that this season set the tone for the next 13-ish Michigan State seasons, where Dantonio and this team in particular set the stage for what was going to come next. And those were the really memorable seasons, the Rose Bowls, the Sugar Bowls, the Big Ten titles, like a Big Ten title. OMG. Oh, those are so good. They're so good.
Okay, I'm so glad we got to talk about 2007 Michigan and 2007 Michigan State, so you could have your nice orgasmic celebration of the Antonio era and all the Rose Bowls and all the big titles and playoff games and the Cotton Bowl. And are there any other great Dantonio achievements? Should we just go every? We'll talk about 2007 and then talk about every Dantonio win thereafter.
Yeah, I do want to apologize. I think I said Sugar Bowl and I meant Cotton Bowl. I'll give you 1 point here, Pat. I remember you specifically calling me and yelling from New Orleans that Spartan tears taste like sugar. And that was a Dantonio era season. Brady Hoke had his one good year. Dantonio is a college football Hall of Famer. He also, I do believe, either already has or is about to have his name in the Ring of Honor, as they call it at Spartan Stadium. I believe he is a Michigan Sports Hall of Famer now as well. So yeah, I can keep going if you would like. He's in the Rose Bowl Hall of Fame, won one game there. Imagine just going to one game, winning it, and getting in the Hall of Fame. What a legend.
Yeah, it's too bad, his career had to end the way it did against Jim Harbaugh, and he had to be returned to status as a little brother as he went out.
Oh, my God. Yeah, sometimes you just get old.
And we were on such a positive note there for a moment.
Yeah, I was sick of it. I was sick of all the athletics. So you know what? Yeah. You got to be reminded.
That's fair.
You got to be back in your place.
We can. I think we enjoy the. Somebody's got to move on, otherwise this will go back and forth between the two of you. For let's just continue it via text.
All right.
But I was going to say, I'm sure we can find a Michigan basketball team or something that would set the stage for some fun discussions. I do think talking a little bit about college sports has been fun for me. A little bit of a departure from some of the other teams we've done in the sense that, these are teams that are obviously really personal to us. We have a lot of fond memories and just passion for the sports. Clearly, we've got some passion for the NBA, though no real passion for the Indiana Pacers. Actually, just the opposites.
Yeah, no, I just, I want to mention some names from Michigan State football history. Chris Rucker, great player. He was a freshman that year, the 2007 team. Part of it really instilled the no-fly zone mentality. We had Jonal St. Deke. Remember Jonal St. Deke? He led the Big Ten in sacks that year. 10 total, 14 and a half tackles for loss, 8 forced fumbles, tied an NCAA record. Along with that, of course, you had J.O. Colcrick, 21 rushing touchdowns, Javon Ringer, 1,400 plus rushing yards. Otis Wiley, junior that year, safety, 3 interceptions. Just a lot of stuff that created the future of Michigan State football.
Yeah, noted. It was the beginning of a great era. We can't keep doing rebuttals the rest of the night, so I'll just say, as always, this was fun. We should not wait a month to do another one. We've got some other ideas, Michigan or Michigan State notwithstanding. I'm sure there are some more of our teams we can dig into, but we'll figure out what's next. Any other parting words?
Yeah,
everybody.
One thing we talked about first time coaches just in college, but I wanted to say there are some similarities from Dantonio taking over at Michigan State, the way he started to the way that things started for Dan Campbell and with the Lions, and kind of taking over a franchise. And we talked about this a lot, where it was same old Spartans. I think there was this kind of feeling around the Lions that they just were going to be a laughingstock and the worst. And we had some text arguments about how much culture matters. And I think Dantonio and now Dan Campbell, I think in football especially, building a culture of toughness and resiliency. So we talked about Dantonio at his press conference, and like another famous press conference person is Dan Campbell, who talks about biting kneecaps and how you'll never give up. And it's very, very similar. Maybe that stuff works best in Michigan with like the blue collar culture, but I think it's football specific. And so I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, it's a good comparison. I thought a little bit about that too over the Dan Campbell years. And I do think both like a culture and just there's just like an authenticity to it, right? Where I don't think, I think the reaction to the Dan Campbell kneecap comment was in part because none of us really knew who the guy was, and without realizing that that's actually who he is, you're just like, what is happening with this guy? So it's like his introductory press conference and he's talking in these weird football cliches, and then you actually watch him coach and realize, no, like that's not shtick. That is like actually who he is, and he is going to ingrain that into his team. And that's where we're talking circling back to Dantonio and his press conference, like you said, and you could just tell that he was just legitimately pissed. Like, and so I think that authenticity is what sort of shone through, and you could tell that was. It's not so much like what he said, is that, and for either of them, it's that it was consistent with who they were and who they wanted their programs to be, and they were going to fill the program up with that sort of energy. I think is probably a good through line to draw. All right, now any other thoughts? I've tried to end this a couple times. You guys just want to keep going. We're at an hour and 38 minutes though. Anything else?
This was fun. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
That was fun. Do just want to say that despite all the light, there's always the darko ages.
On that note, I hope you all enjoyed this. We're going to keep workshopping that one, but I do like it as a starting point. Hopefully everybody enjoyed this. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell all your friends, even if they're Michigan fans, tell them that they are well represented by Pat. They might not like hearing all of the Dantonio chatter, but at some point we'll give them one to celebrate. How about that? There's a tease for some time down the road. It might be 2 years from now, but someday we'll do a fun Michigan team. Maybe when Zach's on vacation. All right. Thanks, guys. I'll talk to you all later.
Yeah. Thanks.
See ya.
See y'all.